Hi everyone, my name is Aneta. I am an artist illustrator and welcome to my channel. Today's video is a part of my new series where I explore painting like artists from the golden age of illustration, which took place at the end of 19th and the beginning of 20th century. After my last video where I tried to paint like Edmund Dulac, I decided to slightly change the format of these videos. At first I was really aiming to replicate the artist's style one-to-one, but I realized something important. You are always you. No matter how much you try to mimic someone else's technique, your own voice will naturally come through. Many of you noticed that in my last video I didn't seem fully comfortable with some of the choices I made. So for this piece, I decided to approach it more loosely and intuitively. Otherwise, I would end up feeling frustrated with the process or even hating the artwork, and creating shouldn't feel that way. Of course, there will always be times when we are not fully happy with what we make, but the process shouldn't feel frustrating. What matters is learning something new each time. Try new things not because you have to, but because that's how you grow. The main idea is you can't become someone else, and that's actually a good thing. Be yourself, follow your curiosity, and let your inspirations shape your own unique style. So the artist I'm going to explore today is Jon Bauer. He was a Swedish illustrator who worked in the early 1900s and sadly had a very short life. While I was doing my research, I came across this beautiful video titled Jon Bauer, the Man That Saw Trolls. I'll leave you the link in the description. It's really worth your time if you're interested. As usual, I'm not going to dive too deeply into his biography because that's not the main focus of this video. I'm a huge book collector, especially when it comes to art books and beautifully illustrated editions, but unfortunately I don't own anything by Jon Bauer yet. So instead, I downloaded a few of his artworks from the web. The selection process was honestly really hard because obviously I'm only showing a tiny slice of what he created. His work also evolved over the years, and that's really difficult to capture just in one specific style or phase. But there are definitely some themes and stylistic elements that stand out, and those are the ones I focused on for today's inspiration. Again, I'll mostly be talking about his style, not really about the stories behind the illustrations. Honestly, I don't even know the full background for some of them, and that's not the goal of this series. It's all about studying artists' techniques and getting inspired. So from what I've seen, Jon Bauer mostly worked with watercolors, gouache and ink. His line work is really delicate and actually pretty simple. At first glance, when you look closer, there's a lot of subtle detail, like this piece. You can see all these fine lines in the foliage. I'm guessing he used sepia ink for most of these, since lines aren't super dark. They have that beautiful, soft brown tone. I'm also obsessed with the backgrounds he painted. They have this kind of warm, earthy feel, and he definitely leaned into muted color palettes. The second piece I chose is also really interesting. Again, you can see the same delicate line work, but if you look closely at the character's bonnet, the flowers and even the dress, they're very sketchy and loosely painted. It's not packed with detail, and it has that beautiful kind of imperfection that actually makes it perfect. One thing I noticed about Bauer's characters is that they often have very square, blocky heads, like almost the skull is slightly elongated. Would I want to paint that way myself? I'm not so sure. This actually ties back to something I mentioned earlier. When I look at an illustration like this, I love it. I genuinely do. But if I try to replicate it exactly, I might end up disappointed. And that's something I'm trying to accept. Just because you love a style doesn't mean it will automatically feel natural for you to create it. We're all different, and there's no point putting pressure on yourself to match someone else's style perfectly. Next, I chose a very famous illustration, probably one of the first that comes up when you start exploring Jon Bauer's work. It has a wonderful mood and embodies all the key elements of his art. Soft, moss-covered hills in the background and that gorgeous sepia burnt umber color palette. I really love the darkness coming through this piece. The character in the foreground is very light, and look at how beautiful the reflection is. It's so loose compared to the more detailed background. This is honestly one of the most iconic pieces, and I'm debating whether I should try to incorporate that loose reflection style in my own painting, but I find it quite challenging to replicate well. Next illustration, again, you'll notice a common thing. Bauer often shows his characters from a profile view, which is something I've been enjoying a lot in my own drawings lately too. There's something about his style that really reminds me of medieval art. You know, I absolutely love detailed Art Nouveau pieces, and there was a time when I craved intricate detail in art. Now though, I find I need more space to breathe in a piece. I can't be overwhelmed by too many details. I think at some point I started to long for simplicity. It has to be intentional though. I'd rather have a piece where I can clearly see the intention behind the color choices and brush strokes, where there's a certain smoothness and space. I'm more about creating moods than focusing solely on the subject matter or making things beautiful in a traditional sense. This ties back to my earlier point about being loose with your art. It's something I admire in others but struggle to embrace myself. I'm not just there yet. Now, as for the trolls that appear in his artwork, I'm not planning on drawing any creatures like that myself. I'm not going to force myself to something I don't feel connected to. Don't get me wrong, I love their design, they're fun to look at. I just don't feel that spark. So I'm going to skip that part. Here we can see another similar image to the previous one. I really like the landscape in the background, especially that opening over the lake. One stylistic choice that I don't fully embrace though is the way the character's hair is drawn. You know how much I love drawing long flowing hair, but I just don't understand this sort of swirly like bulky hair. It gives me this heavy, almost unnatural feeling which I can't quite connect with, and it doesn't bring me that sense of lightness I enjoy. I do like how he used small white dots, almost like tiny shimmering sparks scattered throughout the piece. I might actually try using that technique, though I'm not quite sure yet. This illustration brings me back to that medieval vibe I mentioned before. The characters' designs remind me a lot of the illustrations used in old fairy tale books, where certain elements repeat in almost musical, rhythmic way. For instance, a princess who seeks something from a witch only to be sent to another witch, and so on. This repetition fits perfectly with the mood of this illustration, creating that feeling of rhythm. Then we have this illustration, which gives me Gustav Klimt vibes. What strikes me about it is how dynamic the characters are, even though they're standing still. The way the movement is captured in their posture and gestures feels quite powerful. In the last illustration, and this ties back to something I mentioned at the very beginning, it gives me such a sense of peace. I don't know the story behind it, but I love how the composition is divided. You have this dark forest on the left, the character on the moose escaping it, and the open night sky above. It creates this beautiful, peaceful mood that I'm really drawn to. So let's move on to the painting and see how it all turns out in the end. Obviously, I decided that not starting with the famous forest in the background would be a shame, and I thought this would be a nice change. Whenever I do a background like that, I tend to lose myself in all the branches, wanting to add a lot of details. That's fine, and I'm sure I'll continue doing that, but every now and then it's nice to take a break. I was inspired by a scene I mentioned earlier that feels very stable yet dynamic. So I came up with the idea of a fairy giving a crown to a water creature with a lot of long wavy hair floating around. I'm lately in a phase where I prefer faceless characters, so every character has their face hidden or shown somehow from the back. This probably won't be a rule though, so don't worry, I'll be forever painting characters like that, but I think it looks cool. It gives that sense of mystery to characters. I've mentioned in my previous video, I used to mainly use black fine liner and then fill in the colors afterward. But with watercolors, regardless of their transparency, they always tend to stay in the lines anyway. I got tired of having to refine those lines later on, essentially redoing the entire outline on top of the old one. So for this piece, I decided to use a grey liner instead. Not only it was light enough that I could later emphasize the lines when needed, but it also didn't bind the way black ink does. Now, I couldn't use masking fluid on this paper. I love this delicate paper, but it's not really great for masking fluid, so I had to take the long path. For the background, instead of using a large brush, I went for a smaller one. I was really excited about this process because it was the first time I used Rembrandt Dusk Yellow instead of using sepia and trying to combine it with black. I thought it would be fun to use this color along with some granulating colors from the Schmincke Super Granulating set. I must admit though, I still struggle with painting intuitively. I have a hard time allowing happy accidents to happen. I tend to go back and tweak things which I know I shouldn't do, especially with watercolors and particularly with super granulating paints. Once you apply a color, you should really let it sit and allow the paint to do its magic. If you keep adding layers, you might lose that beautiful effect. So I struggled a bit here and there, especially with the heels I wanted to include. Then I started painting the characters, and for some reason I had a bit of trouble with the hair. I kept going back and forth between the lines. I even regretted not sticking with the flat layer I initially applied to the hair, but then I thought the simple effect just didn't feel right anyway. It looked too sketchy, like something I'd do for a quick sketch or just a rough draft. I kept adjusting with my brush, but in the end I was happy with the effect I achieved. Then I moved on to the creature in the water. Initially I wanted to create a beautiful water effect like in that famous illustration I mentioned earlier, but then I realized I might lack the skills or the patience to recreate that effect perfectly. I think it would have looked beautiful, but I didn't know how to match everything together, so I stuck with my usual method. I think it's important when you're painting to make sure nothing feels out of place, like having one element that looks like it was glued onto the piece. I used to do that a lot, but it's something I've learned to avoid over time. This water part reminded me of that struggle, and I had a few days when I felt stuck. Eventually, I just kept painting and I used the brush to smooth out the transitions a little. I didn't film the full process when it comes to the lower part of the piece. When I work with details, I tend to put my head very close to the paper, so filming at that point wouldn't have made much sense. In this part, I changed my mind many times while painting, adjusting the flow of the waves and battling with the feeling that the water wasn't turning out how I planned. Eventually, though, I made peace with it. That's a bit of what happened behind the scenes. Then I moved on to painting fish. I opted for a very simple approach, letting the granulating watercolors create the texture naturally. I added some sepia fine liner for extra definition, and that's when the piece really started to come together. At the end, I considered adding more white finishing touches. I added a few but decided to stop as they didn't suit the piece as much as I initially thought they would. Overall, I'm really happy with the final effect. I'm still not completely convinced about the water part, but it's not too bad. I think I managed to save it somehow. I've scanned and edited the piece and it's now available in my InPrint shop. For now, I'm using InPrint as a platform to sell prints because they're reliable. I even have 2 prints from their shop hanging on my studio wall. I'll have the link in the description if you'd like to check it out. Let me know what you think. Is there anything you'd suggest improving or any feedback you have on this piece? Thank you so much for your support. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and like the video, it really helps me out. In my next video, I'm thinking about trying something a little different. I'm not sure what yet, but we'll see. Thank you so much for watching and I hope to see you next time. Take care.